Hello there. In this video, we'll be discussing today the 7 characteristics of life, or in other words, a brief guide into what makes something alive. So the first thing to note is that all living things are made of cells. So if you think back, remember that cells are the basic unit of life. So all living things, if they are to be considered alive, need to have at least one cell. So these can be unicellular organisms, such as bacteria, which only contain one cell, as well as multicellular organisms, which are organisms that are normally much larger and have specific functions. So inside of those organisms, their cells are each going to have a specific function unique to it. So for example, think about blood cells. Blood cells carry oxygen throughout your body. All living things will grow and develop. So remember, to grow in size and change over physical time is what we consider growing and developing. So growing is to increase in size, and developing is to change in physical form or mature over time. So this can be like metamorphosis, like the caterpillar into the butterfly, or growing up and or maturing. So think about going from an infant all the way up to an adult. All living things obtain and use energy. So a metabolism, if something is alive, it normally has a metabolism, which can be summarized as the total chemical reactions inside of an organism. Now, organisms need food to go ahead and grow, develop, and reproduce. And the way they do this there are two primarily different examples. We have autotrophs, which can go ahead and create their own food. So for example, plants. And we have heterotrophs, so organisms that must go ahead and get their energy by consuming others. So simply put, think of animals. All living things are organized. So the description here is organisms have internal organizations. So these can go ahead and help regulate conditions inside the body, as well as, like we said earlier, have difference in functions or a division of labor. So certain areas or organs, cells inside the body do specific things, and this helps the organism go ahead and survive in a cohesive manner. For example, homeostasis is a balance of internal conditions. So that's maintaining balance. Think about your body. When it goes ahead and it gets too hot, what do you start to do? Well, like that picture states, you start to sweat. And think about what happens if your body gets too cold. You start to shiver, causing your muscles to go ahead and vibrate, creating body heat. So some examples include your body temperature, internal pH, and your blood pressure, all of which need to be maintained in a fairly narrow range. All living things reproduce. So, this is simply put carrying genetic information from one generation to the next by producing new organisms of the same type. There are two primary methods of doing this. You have asexual reproduction, which is the organism reproducing by itself. Simply put, imagine making a clone or an exact copy. So the organism goes ahead, splits, and now there are two. These include things like bacteria. Or the organism can reproduce via sexual reproduction, involving two different parents, each of which go ahead and contribute their own unique genetic information, kind of creating a combination or hybrid of the information in the offspring. So this is primarily done by all eukaryotic organisms, or organisms that have a nuclei and are multicellular. All living things respond to their environment. So all living things, to be considered alive, react in some way, shape, or form to what's around them. For example, they could relate to light, temperature, odor, gravity, aggression, pressure, water, etc. So as long as the organism is going ahead and reacting to that something around it, so for example, plants go ahead and they tend to go ahead and grow towards the sun. Whereas, think about a hot day. And during the summer, I know we've had quite a few. Most organisms, if they see it, are going to go ahead and seek out shade. Why? Because, well, it's hot out. And the shade provides a nice reprieve from that harsh sunlight. All living things adapt and evolve or change over time. So an adaptation is anything that allows an organism to become better suited to its environment. And the more adaptations an organism acquires over time leads to what we call evolution, or organisms becoming better suited for their environment and changing to increase that level of effectiveness in their environment over time. So we have a couple of examples here. We have the peppered moths. So if you actually look close in this photo down here, you'll see a moth. Kind of outlined in purple right there. It's a little tough to see, but over time this organism has adapted to blend in with its environment. Another example of this is mimicry. So if you take a look here, we have two different snakes. We have the scarlet king snake, and we have the eastern coral snake. Now, the scarlet king snake is completely non-venomous, whereas the eastern coral snake is very venomous. So over time, the eastern coral snake would go ahead, bite things, and they would die off, or get extremely sick and hurt. Whereas the scarlet king snake saw this, it's like, huh, that's a pretty good idea. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to gradually get the colors that I need to make it look like the eastern coral snake. Why? Because when I do, nobody's going to mess with me. Anyway, that's just a short example. So an easy way, or at least the way I tend to remember these things, is the way to remember the characteristics of life is with Go Racer. So, Go Racer. G, grow and develop. O, organized. R, reproduce. A, adapt and evolve. C, cells. E, energy. And R, react to the environment. So if you can remember Go Racer, you can remember the 7 characteristics of life. And that right there is going to go ahead and close up this episode on the 7 characteristics of life. If you have any questions, please go ahead and make sure to ask your teacher or instructor, and they'll make sure they point you in the right direction. Now that that's taken care of, now you know, and until next time, you take care.